optimal minimal.
At this altitude, I can run flat out for a half mile before my hands start shaking.
Can I ask you a personal question?
Now would seem an appropriate time.
What if I did the opposite?
I'm a cybernetic organism, living tissue over a metal endoskeleton.
Tim Ferriss Show.
This episode is brought to you by AG1, the daily foundational nutritional supplement that supports whole body health. And I do get asked a lot what I would take if I could only take one supplement. And the true answer is invariably AG1. It simply covers a ton of bases. I usually drink it in the mornings and frequently take their travel packs with me on the road. So what is AG1? AG1 is a science-driven formulation of vitamins, probiotics, and whole food sourced nutrients. In a single scoop, AG1 gives you support for the brain, gut, and immune system. So take ownership of your health and try AG1 today. You will get a free 1-year supply of vitamin D and 5 free AG1 travel packs with your first subscription purchase. So learn more, check it out. Go to drinkag1.com/Tim. That's drinkag1, the number 1, drinkag1.com/Tim. Last time, drinkag1.com/Tim. Check it out. Hello, boys and girls. This is Tim Ferriss, and welcome to another episode of The Tim Ferriss Show, where it is my job each and every episode to deconstruct world-class performers, experts from various disciplines across all industries. And today we have Brandon Stanton, who is the creator of the #1 New York Times bestselling books, Humans in New York, Humans of New York, Stories, as well as the children's book, Little Humans of New York. In 2013, he was named one of the 30 under 30 people changing the world by Time magazine. Brandon has told stories from around the world in collaboration with the United Nations and was invited to photograph President Obama in the Oval Office. His photography and storytelling blog, Humans of New York, is followed by more than 25 million people, plus me, on several social media platforms. He's a graduate of the University of Georgia and lives in New York City. You can find his work on Instagram at HumansOfNY, as in New York. On Facebook, Humans of New York, humansofnewyork.com, and a video series based on the blog recently became one of the first pieces of original content acquired by Facebook. So you can find that as well, Humans of New York, the series. Brandon, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Tim.
I really appreciate you making the time, and I've been following your work for quite a few years now, and I'm excited to have a chance to pick at some of the earlier days and explore questions that have been on my mind for a few years now.
All right, take away.
So the first question I wanted to take a stab at is actually one I'm borrowing from another Georgian, and that is Joe Gebbia, the co-founder of Airbnb, who likes to ask this question. Do you remember the first time you got in trouble, or one of the first times you got in trouble?
Oh, God. The first time I got in trouble.
Or a notable time that you got in trouble when you were younger.
Well, a notable time I remember, I was sitting in, my mom used to take us to the grocery store a lot of times after school, and you know, she was just going to run in for a few minutes and grab something. And so we were just supposed to sit in the car, and I think I was like, 9 or 10, and I wasn't supposed to touch anything, but there were all these like buttons on the dashboard and things like that. And I remember she came back out, and I think, the alarm's going off, and then the keys, the steering wheel's locked, and you can't move the car. And I remember that one very vaguely because I wasn't allowed to go to the fall festival at the school that year, which was my favorite thing to do because they had like carnival, games and things like that. So going back in my mind about the, a painful early time of getting in trouble, that comes into mind.
As I was doing homework for this conversation, I was reading up on some of the, I suppose, earlier days, and the particular sentence that I wanted to explore was in a previous interview of yours, and it covers quite a bit, but it said, after having flunked out of college and later going back and graduating as a history major with straight A's, and then it goes on to say a number of other things.
Right.
But did you get into a lot of trouble as a kid, or what led to the flunking out of college?
Right. Well, I mean, I always say that, a lot of my early trouble was coming from this thought that I had to do something really big in the world. And, I'm sitting in class all day and I'm learning these kind of, very minute details about things like the Magna Carta and, the Compromise of 18 whatever. And none of this really seemed important at all because, I felt that I was, my purpose had to be much greater than this. And then how am I going to use any of this in life? And so I spent all of my time, back then I was smoking a lot of weed, and just like trying to think about what my big idea and what my contribution to the world was going to be. And instead of going to class, I was doing that, instead of really kind of working to improve myself, I was doing that just, pontificating and then just like thinking all the time about what my contribution to the world was going to be, and that was the time that I flunked out. And things really started moving forward for me was when I threw in the towel. I waved the white flag. I said, I'm going to stop trying to figure out what the big thing I'm supposed to accomplish is, and I'm just going to start doing what I was supposed to do. And I started riding the bus and started going to community college, Georgia Perimeter College. I got my grades back up. I went back to the University of Georgia where I flunked out of, and I focused on becoming a disciplined person and having a routine in my life of working out every day, playing piano every single day, doing my homework. And, it's funny because when I stopped trying to think about this big thing that I was going to accomplish in life and started just focusing on putting one foot in front of the other every single day, it began to propel me on the journey that ultimately led to Humans of New York, which was something bigger than I could have ever imagined when I was hitting the bong in the Creswell dorm at the University of Georgia.
Now, this preoccupation that you had with your big contribution to the world, I don't know how common that is. I didn't have that preoccupation. Did that come from parents? Did that come from a book you read? Where did that come from?
Psychedelic mushrooms might have had a little something to do with it.
I could see that. I could see that.
I just it's just like I spent so much time, I had a very intelligent group of friends, and, so much of, my 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, was just, I guess, partaking in these recreational activities, trying to figure out what is truth, like what is the meaning of all of this, and like all of these kind of big questions. Compared to which, these intricacies of things like calculus and algebra and, verb conjugations and French and, all these subjects I was being forced to do in school seemed so minor and not useful to what I really wanted to understand. And, alongside these kind of like big questions about, why are we here and what is this all about, came this kind of feeling. And, I think some sort of kind of vague like spirituality was wrapped up in it as well, that, this world is so amazing, and the fact that we're here is so amazing, and doing anything less than something amazing is kind of squandering this whole reason that you're here. And I think that was the kind of thinking, that brought me down this path, that I was, my time was too good, and my thoughts, like, the space in my brain was too precious to, fill it up with all these, this homework and this stuff that seems so unimportant. And so instead I just, spent all my time just kind of grappling with these bigger things.
What was it like growing up in Marietta, Georgia? Am I right?
Yeah.
And were you born in Georgia also?
Yeah, I was born in Georgia. I mean, I am somebody who has liked everywhere I've ever been. I liked my school, I liked my college, I liked the community college I went to after I flunked out of my college. I liked Atlanta, I liked Chicago, I love New York. I'm generally somebody who appreciates the place that I'm in. I tend to find that people complaining about where they live, not always. I mean, it's not there's always some place that you can be that might be better for you. But if you hate the place that you live, if you kind of just despise it, I find that a lot of times a new environment is not the key to your happiness, because I find it a lot of times the people that are complaining about one place when they move to another place, then if they live in Atlanta and the answer is New York, then when they get to New York, you know what? New York's dead. The answer is L.A. When they get to LA, oh, the American values suck. Need to get to Paris. When they get to Paris, oh, the West is so, it's so materialistic. I need to go to India. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so I find a lot of times the people who kind of externalize their environment as being the reason for their dissatisfaction tend to be unsatisfied everywhere. I'm kind of the opposite. I've loved every place that I've lived. I've loved the people, that I've met in every place I lived. Marietta was Starbucks and Barnes and Noble, but I had a great group of friends, and I enjoyed growing up there.
I'm just piecing the connective tissue together as I go because I'm really interested. I don't know why this is the case, but particularly in the last 6 months, I've been more and more fascinated by the earlier stages with almost everyone I've been chatting with. The history major, you graduate with straight A's, and then you end up, and I know you've spoken quite a bit about this, so we won't belabor the point, but you get a job as a bond trader in Chicago, is my understanding, and it was sort of the first time that you weren't embarrassed in front of family and friends about where your life was going. You get this prestigious job. How did you go about choosing that job or finding that job, or how did it find you from history, right?
Right. So, I mean, the whole reason to catch you up a little bit, when I first went to the University of Georgia, I was majoring in business. That's when I wasn't going to class. I flunked out. And then when I decided to go back to college, I thought to myself, well, I'm just going to study something that I enjoy anyway. So it's not this kind of, major force of effort to go to class and to do my work. At that time, I had developed a reading habit. That was really when my life kind of turned around. Because remember, I stopped thinking about these kind of big problems I wanted to solve. And, I started focusing on, establishing a routine and some discipline in my life. And one of the first big ones, and still probably the most monumental routine that I ever established and decision I ever made, was that I was going to read 100 pages a day, mostly nonfiction. And whether the book was The Little Prince or it was something like The Wealth of Nations, whether it took me an hour or whether it took me 8 hours, every single day I was going to read 100 pages. And I did that for years. Even when I went back to school, in addition to my schoolwork, I would read 100 pages.
What catalyzed, sorry to interrupt, but what catalyzed that decision? I mean, was there a
feeling? It was this feeling, I mean, psychologically, it was like this feeling of being, maybe behind. I remembered, one of the very first books that I read was this autobiography of Ben Franklin, and he has all these kind of he did the Poor Richard's Almanac, and he has all these kind of sayings. And I remember first of all, Ben Franklin himself was kind of the pioneer in getting self-improvement down to a science.
Definitely.
You know what I mean? And so his example, first of all, of how much effort he put into improving himself and moving himself forward. And then I remember he had this one quote, that uneducated genius is like finding silver in the mine, and it kind of it made me think that I had spent all this time kind of thinking and kind of pondering, and I thought that I was, that school was beneath me and school was boring. And, because of that, I really hadn't been imbibing much information. And, at that time, something kind of flipped. And I felt like, I've missed out on probably the last 4 or 6 years of education because I was just doing the minimum. I was just getting by, writing my papers before class. I was probably looking at the person's next to me's paper a few times. And so it's like, even though I was making okay grades, I really wasn't taking in a lot of information and educating myself. And so, I think that at that time I decided I was going to become extremely educated. And, I did become an extremely educated person, but, 95% of that education was outside of school. 95% of that education was over the course of 7 or 8 years, saying I'm going to read 100 pages of nonfiction a day, every single day. And I did it for 7 or 8 years. I'd say 60% of that was biography. I would say another 20% of it was history. And then, I would read fiction too, when I was absolutely tired of eating my vegetables. And that's what I would call, the most boring books, the really kind of conceptual one I just viewed as vegetables. I was just like, it was sometimes hard to get through, but
the fiber of knowledge.
yeah, but it grows and it kind of develops you. But yeah, so biographies were the ones that I was really, really drawn to. And so, at the time, I started like kind of reading all these biographies and I was loving it. And biography is just history. Biography is the best form of history, if you ask me, because it cuts through the theory, it cuts through, all the speculation of the author, and we get down to the nuts and the bolts of the decisions that people made in their lives. And I think that is the purest form of education that you can get. And it is the advice that I give people who don't know what they want to do with their lives. Pick somebody that you admire and read their biography. Read their biography. If you really want some sort of guidance in your life, pick somebody who's done things that you want to do and that you really admire and read a nice fat 800-page biography of their lives. Find out the struggles they went through. Find out the twists and turns of their lives and the decisions they made. And I mean, I don't think there's any better actionable roadmap, actionable education than getting down the granular level of somebody's life and finding out how they navigated it.
If someone wanted to, let's just say that they are having a lapse of concentration and can't think of people they admire who have biographies, if you were to recommend any, let's just say 1 to 3 biographies as gateway drugs into that world, are there any that come to mind?
It depends upon what you want to accomplish in life. Like if you're just flagging and you don't know what you want to do, start with Ben Franklin. Start with somebody who is very disciplined and programmatic in figuring out how to develop themselves. Again, my advice always to people who are stuck is quit looking at the big pictures. People get stuck because they want to accomplish too big of things and they don't know the right step to take. So I always say, just kind of, instead of focusing on the year, instead of focusing on the arc of your life, focus on the 24-hour period. And nobody mastered the 24-hour period more than Benjamin Franklin. So it's like, if you have no idea what you want to do, start there, I would say. If you know what you want to do, you've got to pick the person that you admire the most. Do you want to participate in social movements? Pick Martin Luther King. Do you want to be president of the United States? If you want to be president of the United States, I would recommend Lyndon Johnson. Lyndon Johnson, because he was probably the president that was given the least in his life, except for maybe Abraham Lincoln. He didn't go to Ivy League. He didn't. He wasn't necessarily a great looking guy. He went to San Marcos Teacher College. He basically, and again, this is if you want to be president. I don't want to be president. He worked his way up through understanding how the levers of democracy work, the levers of power in our government work. And so he is a fascinating character sketch on how to be president. If you want to read a Lyndon Johnson biography, you should read the 4-volume biography by Robert Caro, which is the best of those. But other than that, it's just like it all depends upon what it is that you want to do in life. There's just no biography that every person should read. They should pick the person they admire the most and read the biography of their life.
With Ben Franklin, would it be a biography like Walter Isaacson, or would you
the Isaacson one was the one I read, and that stands out the most because it was the first. The person that I've read the most biographies on, probably Theodore Roosevelt, just because his life is so fascinating. Probably Adolf Hitler, probably Stalin, and it's not because in any way these people are admirable, but like as a history major, to me it wasn't the individual themselves that was fascinating. To me, it was how does a group of people, Germany was a smart, industrialized country. To me, the big philosophical question that fascinated me, and the reason that I've delved so much into the lives and the practices of dictators is, how is it that a group of such educated, smart, well-meaning people were able to be, able to be organized under the premise of committing such evil. And that to me has always fascinated me, because I believe that people are inherently good. And, I've traveled to 30 or 40 different countries, and, it's funny. Every place has a reputation. Oh, don't go to this city. People won't talk to you. So many times when I land in a place, they say, oh, this isn't going to work here. People aren't open here. People aren't friendly here. And, I find one-on-one people all over the world, are very they kind of share, a similar soul, I guess. And if people are generally the same everywhere, then that means anywhere something like this could happen.
Right.
Anywhere, people can get pulled into this crowd psychology and direct their anger and their hatred and violence towards people in a way that would contradict their morals if you met them one-on-one. And because of that, the lives and the periods of history that have always been most intellectually interesting to me, again, it's not something I admire, it's not something I'm looking to duplicate, of course, have been these periods where a very driven ideological individual has managed to mobilize a group of people towards ends that, looking back from a historical perspective, were brutal and violent and absolutely unexplainable. And, I think it's important to understand these things to keep it from happening again. Do you remember you asked about bond trading?
Oh, I do. Oh, no.
Two questions ago, I never even talked about it. And the whole reason I think, I started talking about histories because bond trading was really an anomaly in my life. I was really kind of wrapped up in all these things that we're talking about now. I was really kind of wrapped up in history and biography mainly. When Obama, it was, God, what was it, 2008, 2007? I think it was 2007. He was in the primary. And I really became fixated on this campaign. And, I was going to knock on doors, and this was during the primary when he was going up against Hillary, and I was knocking on doors. I was going to different states and knocking on doors, and I was reading every article about the delegate system and super delegates. And, there was this point where I was just absolutely positive he was going to win. This is the primary. I was just absolutely positive he was going to win. And I was broke at the time. This is not something I would ever do today. But I took out $5,000 in student loans, and I actually bet on Barack Obama to win the presidency.
Where does one bet on something like that?
Back then, it was an Irish exchange. It has since gone under. It was called Intrade. And I think they had him at like 40% chance to win at that time. And he had like a 70% chance to win or something. And so, I didn't make a ton of money off of it because it took me like a week to wire my money to Ireland. And in the time that I was wiring my money, he had won a couple more prizes.
The odds changed.
Yeah. Exactly. And so, I ended up only I made like, $1,000, $1,200, which for me as a college student was all the money in the world. But more fatefully, I was telling that story just like I'm telling it to you, to a friend of mine who worked in Chicago, and he was a trader. He was a bond trader, and I was telling him that story, and he told me, the one differentiator between successful traders and unsuccessful traders in our office is their comfort with risk taking, and based on that story, I would like you to talk to my boss. And so
based on the extreme prudence you've demonstrated with that story.
Well, yeah, it's I think it was kind of the comfort with risk taking. And so,
right.
At that time I was, I didn't know what I wanted to do again. I just studied history because I enjoyed it, and I really enjoyed it. And so he got me an interview with his boss, and it was scheduled. And I mean, this is somebody who went to an Ivy League school, and, he had studied finance his entire life, and he had gotten this job. So I thought this was an opportunity I would not have any other way. And I wasn't sure what I wanted to do at the time. I was a history major. And so I had like a month to prepare. So I read about 20 books on the market. And then I went into the interview, and at that time I was very well versed on how markets worked, and that's how I got that job.
Good thing you had all that reading practice.
Go.
What was your first week as a bond trader like?
Well, I mean, and see, this is and I always try to say, when I I mean, if somebody has just listened to this interview up until this point, I think we talk about, bond trading and dictators, which really has nothing to do with my life now. But I think the narrative that people in interviews always try to put on me is that, because I mean, it's a fun narrative. Oh, chasing the money, doing this soul-sucking finance job, and then cut the rope behind him to pursue his true passion, which was taking photographs and art. And I mean, there's a kernel of truth there, but the real story is that markets were fascinating to me. I'm still fascinated by markets. They seem so tangible when you're watching CNBC and you're seeing these numbers, and it seems all so mathematical. But in reality, markets are nothing but a bunch of people arguing over what something's worth. It's just like it's a market. If you remove the computer and go back 50 years, a market is a crowd of people haggling over what something that is impossible to value is worth. And the number that comes out of it is really based on psychology, and it's based on this back and forth over what these numbers mean. And that was always so interesting to me, and it remains very interesting to me. So I was philosophically very interested in markets, and I was fascinated by bond trading, and I was obsessed with it, to be honest, for 2 years. And it was a type of bond trading. We were very highly leveraged, and so it was a type where there was just huge gains or huge losses like every single night. I compare it to like playing a very high stakes game of poker every single night. And so it was it was extremely, I don't think I could do it today. I was in my early 20s at the time. There was just adrenaline pumping through my body at all times. And, I was in that when you take something that is you're naturally kind of philosophically interested in, and you pair it with, a large amount of money, and a large amount of excitement, it creates this fixation. It's almost like crack, where it's just all you can think about at any given time. And when I go to colleges and I give speeches on the path of humans of New York, and what led me to kind of pursue this life that was outside of books and outside of computer screens, was that I, after the end of 2 years when I lost my job, I kind of looked back at the time that I had spent that 2 years, and it wasn't the physical time that was lost that was most concerning to me. It was that I had spent 2 years using all of my intellect and all of my creative energy trying to figure out how to be the most effective relative value trader in fixed income securities in the Asian markets. It was just something that was so narrow and so myopic, and I couldn't even talk with my friends about it. And at the end of 2 years, we'd gone through the financial crisis. I'd lost everything I'd ever made. When I lost that job, it was a very lucrative job potentially. But when I lost that job, I was broke because I'd lost everything.
Why did you lose the job? What happened?
Well, I mean, it depends upon how much personal responsibility I want to take. I think the narrative that's most protective of the ego is that we had a type of trading that was calibrated to work during periods of low volatility. The years from, I'd guess, 1995 or whatever, or after whenever, I don't know when my math is right, but like late 90s to 2008 were periods of historically low volatility where the type of trading that we were doing worked. And when the financial crisis hit in 2008, volatility went through the roof. Long story short, the type of trading that we were doing stopped working, and the company that had been around for over a decade was out of business about a year after I left. So that's the part of that's the way of explaining that avoids the most personal responsibility. If I was to explain it in the way that makes myself the most personally responsible, markets changed and I wasn't adaptive enough to figure it out. I kept banging my head against the same things that used to be working. I refused to fully embrace the fact that what worked for me extremely well for a year had stopped working. And because of that, the risk calculations had changed, and instead of making a lot of money every night, I was losing a lot of money every night. And I eventually got to the point where, I was no longer a productive member of the firm. And so, it depends upon which story you want to tell. I think the truth is probably somewhere in between the two. But regardless, I ended up without a job.
Well, thank you for telling or sharing both versions of that. And no, it's I think that also reflects a level of, this may not be the right word, but sort of objectivity or an ability to detach and observe that has always fascinated me about you, quite frankly, which certainly translates, I think, in a very empathic way later, and we'll get to that. But I want to talk about the finance world and markets for just a second, because as you noted, it's very tempting for someone who's trying to weave a narrative of your life into this soul-sucking period, sees the light, cuts the tether, burns the ships, off into the arts and true passion. But the markets, as you noted, are really fascinating. And I was chatting with someone I've just gotten to know actually in the last few weeks, I suppose you could call him a wealth manager, but 75% of what he does is invest in bonds. He probably wouldn't call it trading, but in effect, I mean, that's what he's doing. And he said something to me that has stuck in my mind for a while now, which is, I learn more in the first 2 to 4 hours of sitting down and talking to someone about money than their therapists have probably learned over the last 2 to 4 years. And getting to see how people respond to money and loss aversion and the possibility of making money is in and of itself fascinating. Then you add in thousands and millions of market participants, it gets even more interesting. And then when, at least in my limited experience, when I read something, my exposure to bonds is very limited, but when you read something like Liar's Poker by Michael Lewis, which I think is a fantastic book, and the part that stuck out to me where I was like, okay, I need to be very careful about playing this game because I'll get my face ripped off, is there's some part, and I'm going to get all the details wrong, but there's some guy who's nicknamed like Fat Tony, and he's a bigwig at Salomon Brothers, and he bets his buddies that the markets for whatever, AA bonds and X, Y, and Z are going up. And he bets them, and it's this dick measuring contest. And he puts $50 million into the market, and it goes down. and so his friends are busting his balls, and then they're like, market's going up, huh? And so instead of putting 50 million in, he's like, fuck it, and he puts 500 million in, and like all the other market participants panic, thinking that he has information they don't, and so the market goes up, and he says, see, I told you the market was going up.
Right.
And I was like, oh my God, this is not nearly as clean as the textbooks would want you to believe.
Well, I would, as somebody who's interviewed 10,000 people, I would say that, talking with somebody about their money and how they choose to use their money will give you a insight into a very limited, maybe I'm wrong, but like a very limited aspect of their personality, which is their comfort with risk. And, I think our approach to money and our approach to trading and our approach to markets are very much kind of driven by like our animal spirits, greed and fear and things like that. But I feel that there's a huge portion of people's lives and kind of thought lives that are kind of separate and isolated from those drives. You know what I mean? Those very kind of primal drives of wanting more and being afraid to lose. I mean, that's really what drives the markets is the greed and the fear. I think talking with somebody about those two drives and where their greed comes from or where their fear comes from, it'll give you some insight. But to me the markets, they can only tell you so much, and they can only, it's a part of human existence, the drives that control a market. But there's so much that people care about outside of that, and I think that was what was so dangerous about just being a trader, is that you're burying so much of your thought energy into just the desire for more and the fear of losing. You know what I mean? The kind of narrow animalistic drives that push a market up and down, and you're kind of tethering yourself to that. And you just kind of miss out on so much of the life that's going on around you. And this is me. This is me. I think it's part of my personality that once I dive into something, I do it to the exclusion of almost everything else. One of the reasons Humans of New York ended up becoming so successful. I did know, some of, this more the exception than the rule. There are people who are so in control of their emotions, or maybe they don't have the same emotional range as other people, that are able to turn off their computer every single day, go home and not think about the markets and kind of completely leave them there. But, for me, it was something that, was kind of all consuming for me. And, when I made the decision to pursue something more artistic, was when, I had kind of lost my job, and I was looking back at the 2 years of my life, and I was thinking, God, and after I lost my job, I was so scared of that day. During the 2 years when I was obsessing over markets, and then when things started going bad, there was nothing I was more afraid of than losing that job. And then on the day that it happened, it was surprisingly a good day, because I remember taking a walk that day, and I started asking myself things like, what do I want to do? Like, what do I want to do? Something like, if I could do anything with my time, what would I do? And I had been for 2 years like so focused on keeping that job, that I didn't have room in my brain to kind of ask myself any other questions. And so, at that moment, I decided, I've lost these 2 years of not only my time, but more importantly, I've lost 2 years of my thoughts focusing on this game for making money, which was fascinating and philosophically interesting. But, when you boil it down, it's a game. And I said, I'm going to spend the next foreseeable future, instead of spending my time, trying to make money, I'm going to try to make just enough money to where I can control my time and just do something that I enjoy doing for no other reason than it is nourishing in the moment. Not that at the end of the day I'm going to have a profit, but because it's nourishing in the moment. And at that time, it was photography. And the whole reason, I think, one of the best, the kind of neatest things about Humans of New York is that over the past 8 years, Humans of New York has become largely, the most, followed photography project in the world with, I think 25 million on social media now. And it's 8 years old. And I think one of the coolest things is I just started photographing about 8 years ago. I started taking photos during this time that I'm talking with you about. And the whole reason I started taking photos was because I was trying to create some space in my mind away from work. I was desperate for something to do on the weekends that, that would give me this foothold in my brain where I had a sense of purpose and a sense of identity outside how the markets were doing every single day. And so I bought this camera. I started going to downtown Chicago and photographing, just everything. And I loved it. And not long after, I lost my job. And I made the decision that I was going to be a photographer, not because I was very skilled at it at the time, not because I thought it was an angle towards success, and not because I thought it was an angle towards an audience. Is that I just loved doing it in the moment. It was nourishing in the moment. And so I found this thing that was nourishing in the moment that I enjoyed doing. And I said, I'm going to try to structure my life around creating as much time for this as possible. I want to make the minimum amount of I want to make just enough money to where I can pay my rent, eat, and photograph all day long. And the journey that ended up creating Humans of New York was my attempt to create that space in my life and that space in my head to focus on something that was very nourishing in the moment.
How did you cover your expenses in the very early days of that experience?
This was 2008. We had I believe, a record amount of time that you could get unemployment. And I had just lost my job. And so I got $620, I think, every 2 weeks from the government because I was unemployed and I had worked for 2 years. So that was enough to basically just pay my rent in a sublease that I found on Craigslist in Bedford-Stuyvesant, Brooklyn. That was enough to pay that and maybe have peanut butter jelly sandwiches and eggs, assuming that you needed no other expenses, that you wore the same clothes and the same shoes. That was enough for me to just eat, sleep, and photograph all day long. And once I got to have a decent level of skill, and I mean just a passable level of skill, if anybody would pay me to take portraits for them, I would do that. Somebody hired me to do their wedding. I basically, I didn't spend money on anything. All I did was photograph all day long, because I knew that I was making this pivot in my life to where I was going after kind of a lucrative career I was going towards just wanting to spend my time doing something all day long. And so, and I became obsessed with photography in the same way that I was obsessed with markets. I mean, I loved it. I just loved it. It was like a treasure hunt. I mean, just going out, it was so different than trading too. I mean, I'm outside, I'm interacting with the world, I'm having conversations, I'm having these little adventures and discovering these new things. And I was just hooked on it, and I was just obsessed with it. And, I knew I was making a lot of sacrifices to be doing this in my life. So I didn't do anything else. I didn't go to concerts. I didn't go out to restaurants. I didn't spend much time with friends because I didn't really know anybody in New York. I mean, that's another crazy detail about Humans of New York, is that Humans of New York is an 8-year-old photography project, based on people in New York City. I took my first photograph 8 years ago, and I went to New York for the very first time in my life 8 years ago. So it was, all just very new and all very driven by the desire to photograph all day long.
Was the move to New York related to the desire to take photographs, or was it something else?
So, I mean, what I did is, I got fired, and I started. My goal was I want to find out how to be a photographer. I love photography. How am I going to create a life where I can support myself and photograph all day long? And so I was just out doing it every single day. And then I started kind of, along with the graffiti and along with the, architectural shots and along with the nature shots, I started photographing people. And I noticed that out of everything I was photographing, the photographs of people were the most unique. They're the ones that least resembled everything else I was seeing being put on Facebook and stuff like that. And so I decided to kind of focus on that. And then while focusing on that, I started stopping people on the street and asking for their photo and kind of taking a portrait of them. And because of that extra layer of difficulty of having to approach a stranger, the portraits that I was taking of people were more different than the candid photos I was taking of people. And so I started focusing solely on that, and that's when I kind of started having an idea that even though I hadn't been photographing so long, I was heading in a direction that was pretty unique, because I was stopping random people on the streets in a very, I know some people will do series, but I was doing this every single day, and I was getting quite a collection. And this seemed like kind of a kind of fresh type of photography, so it's all I did. And then I started traveling to different cities. I went to Philadelphia, just stopping people. Then I went to New Orleans. I went back to Atlanta and did this. And then I traveled to New York. And when I got to New York and I was stopping people and asking for their photographs, I realized that New York, if you were going to try to do this type of photography, was the best place to be. I mean, mainly just practical reasons. That you don't need a car in New York. I didn't have a car, and I couldn't afford a car. You can just ride the subway everywhere. You can walk everywhere, and there's so many people. I mean, there's so many people. I remember coming out of the Lincoln Tunnel the very first time and looking down, and I couldn't even see the sidewalk because it was rush. It was rush hour, and it was just, there were so many people. And I thought, if I'm going to do this type of photography, this is the place to do it. And I wasn't doing any interviews at this time. And I mean, that's the thing. It's like the Humans of New York that I moved to New York to do looks nothing like the Humans of New York that later became successful. I mean, it was really just the impetus to get me on the ground working every day to kind of figure it out along the way. My very first idea for Humans of New York was I was going to photograph 10,000 people in New York City across all 5 boroughs, and I was going to plot their photo on a map. That was my idea of how I was going to make a life out of being a photographer. Is I was going to be the guy who did that. And that was kind of what got me on the ground, got me out on the streets every single day, approaching hundreds and thousands of people, and put me in the situation where I could kind of innovate and I could start having conversations with these people, which turned into questions I was asking them, which turned into eventually 7 years later, the kind of 90-minute to an hour and a half long, very kind of probing and therapeutic and psychological interviews that I have with random strangers every single day, the result of which and the output of which became the stories that I think people are so connected with, and the stories that really make Humans of New York Humans of New York.
How are you getting better at photography during this, say, first, let's just call it 6-month period, since you certainly seem, from all indications, to be someone who goes for total immersion, and whether it's reading 10 to 20 books on the markets before an interview, you go 100% into whatever subject matter you choose. How are you getting better? What books were you reading? Who were you studying? What were you trying?
I mean, I was too addicted to taking photos to ever stop for a second and learn about photography. I have one memory. I have one memory of going to Barnes & Noble because I couldn't afford to buy any books. I have one memory of going to Barnes & Noble one night and flipping through some photography books and enjoying the photos. But I just wanted to be out taking pictures. I didn't really want to be studying how to take a correct photo. I just wanted to be out photographing. It was the act of it, the act of discovery, and I had a very amateur view of photography at the time, whereas if you get something or somebody interesting in the frame, it's a great photo. I don't care how many points of perspective it has. I don't care about the rules of thirds. I honestly don't really even care about white balance or focus or any of these things. I was just looking for wonderful people and wonderful moments that were happening. I was still doing a lot of candid photography of people. And if I captured that was a good photo. And that's all I cared about. And that was what was driving me for these first several months and this first year and a half when I took thousands and thousands of pictures. And I was getting better slowly. I mean, I'm not necessarily bragging about that kind of aversion to formal training as if it was some sort of badge of honor. It was just the way my psychology was hardwired. And because of that, I might have improved more slowly than somebody else. And in fact, I might have improved so slowly that I'm sure a lot of professional photographers look down on my photography still. But by being that engaged and immersed in the process, as opposed to any sort of a formal structure of what makes a photograph, I innovated my own style. I innovated my own type of work that later on, people have introduced me to Studs Terkel, and people introduced me to, to these wonderful photographers of the past who took these, Jacob Reese, and who took these wonderful photos of regular people that my work, kind of grew to resemble. But I mean, any resemblance just came out of being on the street and doing it all day long and just and figuring out, what it was that I liked the most, and without any education of what a correct photograph was. And, I think if Humans of New York has original elements. If Humans of New York is original in any way, it was because I was just so addicted to taking photos that I never stopped to learn about photography. And because of that, I was figuring it out as I went along.
Well, it seems to me also that there are many different facets of photography, one component of which is the technical knowledge, but certainly another component of which is choosing the subject matter, right? And thinking about the story that an image tells. So you were learning about photography, but you were doing it vis-a-vis the sheer volume of experience that you were gathering behind the camera and walking through New York City.
Right. Well, I was just, I was looking for anything that captured my attention or curiosity at all got photographed. I mean, and that's one of the beautiful things about digital cameras is, you can just take 1,000 photos every single day. And so you don't have to worry about conserving film. Like, you can just photograph everything. And so anything that caught my eye got photographed. And then when you go home and you load your 1,000 pictures on the computer and you start going through, and because you don't know how to photograph, you photograph that person 50 different times, and you're looking at your 50 photos of each person, and you're finding the one that you think looks the best. And then you're going and you're doing it again and you're doing it again. And suddenly you're not taking 50 photos of each person. You're taking 40, then 30, then 20, and then 10 as you start to get an idea of what it is that you think is a great photo and what it is that you like. And that was kind of really how I was honing in on my style again, which might still be considered primitive. It still might be considered unschooled by a lot of people. But I was just honing in on what I liked about a photo. And that was the process.
What were you doing with these photos in the beginning? Or maybe a better question is, when you first started putting photos online, what did that look like?
At first I was putting them, one of my main kind of weaknesses and blind spots in the beginning was not understanding the importance of daily content because, I had never had a blog before. And so I kind of had this great, and it kind of mirrors my journey as a college student where I was like trying to do something huge instead of focusing on doing something every single day. And so I had this huge kind of sweeping project of I was going to photograph 10,000 people and plot their photos on a map. I was dumping about 30 or 40 of these portraits every single day onto this website that I had that nobody was going to, and the numbers. I even had a counter on the top of the website counting up to 10,000 because that's all I cared about was the end. I was going to get 10,000. I was going to create this sweeping photography project.
Was it called Humans of New York at the time, or what was the name?
It was called Humans of New York from the very beginning, yes. And things really, and nobody was really paying attention. I was taking hundreds and thousands of portraits, and things really started to get traction when I started posting the photos as I got them onto social media, mainly Facebook. That is when things really started to grow. And the focus of Humans of New York moved away from this giant sweeping project that was going to cover the entire city of New York and be some sort of representation of New York City. And it switched much more to about the individual. Who is this person that I'm meeting each day? And it became something more personal and immediate. And that's when things really started growing.
Brendan, I'd love to ask you about the Green Lady, if that rings a bell. Could you please describe for folks the experience of the Green Lady?
So, I'm in New York, and I've been trying to make this work for about 6 months now. And 6 months in that time of my life was probably the equivalent about 2 years of work because I worked every single day. I worked on Christmas. I worked on Thanksgiving. I didn't go home. All I did was photograph all day long. I would go out. I would just photograph people. I'd come home. I would take a nap, and then I would go out at night and try to get some more photos. And so I had gotten thousands of these portraits, and not many people were paying attention. I think I had just kind of started posting my photos on Facebook. And I photographed this woman, and she was dressed all in green, and she had green hair and green makeup. And I remember it was a photo that I didn't like. I thought it was a very bad photo, and I wasn't even going to really post it on the blog. But then I remembered that she had said something to me. She had said, "I used to be a different color every single day, but then one day I was green, and that was a great day. And so I've been green for 15 years." And I remember thinking to myself, well, I don't really like the photograph, but I'm going to try putting this quote above it that she said. And I posted it onto Facebook, and suddenly it was the most engaged with photo that I'd ever posted. I think we're talking like 67 likes at this time. There was not a lot of people following my page. And it was kind of a eureka moment, because it really made sense that, during these months and almost a year of doing nothing but approaching random people on the street and asking for their photograph, the thing that strangely I had gotten to be an expert at wasn't the photography, but it was the approaching strangers and the walking up to random people, getting rejected a lot of times and not letting that affect my mood. And then once meeting somebody, in a very short amount of time, making that person comfortable. And kind of the eureka moment was, if that is what I've become good at, if that is what I have to offer the world, shouldn't I, now that I've gotten over this fear of approaching a stranger, use that opportunity to learn a little bit about this person so that I can share a little bit about this person with other people who might be curious of the people around them, but haven't been able to overcome that fear of talking to strangers? And, it turned out that the audience for that, the amount of people who were curious of the lives of the people around them but were too afraid to ask, ended up being hundreds, then thousands, and then tens of thousands, and millions, and then now tens of millions. And, from that moment on, Humans of New York stopped being a photography project. I don't even view myself as a photographer. You can write a 3-page essay about why I'm a horrible photographer, and it's been done many times. And it doesn't really bother me, because I stopped viewing myself as a photographer a long time ago. The photography is really secondary to Humans of New York. Humans of New York is my effort in a short of time as possible to make a random person on the street comfortable enough and seem like somebody's interested enough in their lives that they'll share their story with me, and they'll share something deep and vulnerable and real and honest about their lives, so that I can share that with millions of people every single night. And Humans of New York over the past 6 years has been my effort to get as good at that as possible.
This is a perfect segue to asking about the approaches and questions, which is
a really important thing. I feel guilty because I spent the entire, if you look, I have not posted a picture of myself on Humans of New York in years. I don't do it. I find that Humans of New York is best when I'm the most invisible. I feel that the less Humans of New York is about Brandon Stanton, the more influential Humans of New York has become. So yeah, it's it feels very unnatural to have spent an hour talking already and talk nothing about myself. So please fire away. Ask about the work.
So I'm going to ask about the work, and you can talk about yourself in third person if it makes it feel better. But I will have to involve you in this.
I know.
What do you say when you cold approach someone on the street? Assuming that now, of course, you could use Humans of New York, and a lot of people would recognize it, and you could break the ice that way. But with it early on, when nobody would recognize that, how did you open, and then what did you use to break the ice in the first 60 seconds?
First thing always is, do you mind if I take your photograph? That was the first thing. And I mean, these are all little things I learned. Is you don't walk up to somebody and ask, do you have a minute? Because that immediately puts somebody on defensive, because especially in New York City, people are walking up to you all day long trying to sell you something, asking for money. So people are naturally very defensive. So I don't want my goal is to get into it as soon as possible so people realize that this is something a little bit different, and I'm not looking for their money. That's the main thing. I'm not looking for their money. So I normally walk up and I say, do you mind if I take your photograph? I run a website called Humans of New York, and basically what I do is, over the past several years, I've photographed about 10,000 people on the streets of New York City and around the world. And I just learn a little bit about everyone I photograph. And so I was just wondering if I could take your photo and ask you a few questions.
Now, before you had the 10,000 and went around the world, when it was maybe the 100th person or 200th person, was it the same pitch minus that stuff?
Yeah, I was trying to give you actually the pitch that I used to give in the early days. Now I pull out my cell phone, 2 #1 New York Times bestselling books, 20 million followers on Facebook. And the whole reason of that, even though it kind of sounds like boastful and braggy, is that especially if somebody hasn't heard of Humans of New York, I want to convince them in as short amount of time as possible that it's something real. One, that's important, and that it's something that is a lot of people know about and a lot of people follow. It's not a joke. It's not a prank. You're not going to be embarrassed. You're not going to, my goal is in as short amount of time as possible to kind of make the person feel comfortable. And these days, a big part of that is kind of explaining how big the blog is, because then it's like, oh, this person is not trying to hustle me. This person isn't trying to scam me. But, to be honest, in the early days, my success, the amount of people who let me take their photo wasn't that much less. Except back then I wasn't a best-selling author. I was just a kid, who was, trying to make an art project and people wanted to help. And so, I think a lot of people think that, one of the reasons so many people are willing to talk to me is because Humans of New York is so well known, especially in New York now. But my rate of people who would talk to me was not all that different when I was just getting started.
Are there any other nonverbal keys to that?
Oh God, I mean, there's tons of them. But I mean, again, these aren't things that I like. These aren't things that I planned or read about. It's not that
you had a lot of trial and error.
Well, they were burned into me by being rejected so much. And some rejections on the streets of New York aren't always polite. You know what I mean? And it was hard. In the early days. I mean, I remember there were days. I mean, the hardest part about it was, especially when I got started and Humans of New York didn't have any fans, and it wasn't booked. It wasn't made into any books. And, my family didn't believe in it, and my friends thought I was crazy. I had no photography experience. I'm in New York City, stopping random people and asking them questions, and I'm feeling insecure. And, when you walk up to somebody and you ask them if they can take your photo, and they respond like you're some sort of freak or that you're weird, it's hard to not internalize that, because you're so insecure at the moment about, whether or not what you're doing is weird. And if it's something that am I weird, for asking these people for their photographs? And I'd go out some days and 10 people in a row would make me feel like I'm some sort of freak. Like, do you know what city you're in? You can't be stopping random people. Like, get out of my way. Like, what are you doing? Like, no, you can't take my photo. Like, get out of here. You know what I mean? And like during my formative and like impressionable, early days when I'm trying to figure this out, 5 reactions like that in a row when nobody's paying attention to your work and you've been trying for months and you can't figure it out. I mean, psychologically it was very tough. And, there'd be days where that would happen. I just couldn't do it anymore. And I would just go home and lay in bed.
You there?
Yeah.
You all right?
Well, I mean, it's just like that's the hardest part about doing it.
What would you say to yourself during a period like that? I mean, it sounds so, to me at least, I mean, the picture that it's painting, having experienced some dark periods in my life that have been maybe catalyzed by various things, it sounds really soul crushing. I mean, that sounds really.
Well, I mean, I was just, that was all, like that was all, it was all like, all of the doubt and, all those, and not having any money and, just nobody's paying attention. And, I'm just doing this all day long for months. And, like all the tough shit was, and like the loneliness too. Like I didn't know anybody in New York. Like there was like, I knew like 2 people and like there was a Christmas break where those 2 people went home and like for 2 weeks I didn't see anybody that I knew.
Jesus. Yeah.
And, I remember I spent Christmas Eve alone at a diner. And then I just went out and photographed, it's like, because it was just like it was the only thing that could that would keep me from like thinking about how like unlikely it was and, whether how stupid of an idea it might be. Like the only thing that I think, kept me from thinking about the possibility of failing was doing it, was just photographing. And so like whenever I started to think, is this going to work? Is it not going to work? I just go out and photograph, like that was my only way of like keeping those wolves away of, is this ultimately going to be a success? Am I wasting my time? Am I stupid? Like, the only way to keep those away was to go out and work. And, and so that's what I would do just all day long and do it and do it and do it. And so like these negative things, like the rejection of people and, people saying no, and that I was talking about, like all of the negative stuff, like the thing that was like counteracting that all the time was just loving it so much. I just loved it so much. And so, yeah, it's like, it was just kind of this, the same way I was obsessed with markets, I was obsessed with taking photos. And so that's kind of what carried me through it all.
I mean, listening to this story, it makes me want to ask you, when I look at humans in New York and think about how many thousands of people you've humanized and how much empathy you've created traveling to other countries, helping to paint a more complete picture of humanity instead of allowing sort of mass media distortion to create us versus them mentality, or counteracting that at least to a very real degree, and helping millions of people who have been exposed to your work and the interviews to feel less alone. I mean, that's a huge fucking deal. And it pains me to hear a story like this, but it's so helpful for you to share it, because I wonder how many people have ended up like in that diner alone and just quit, right? They just stopped.
Well, I mean, it's not even about stopping, it's just like, I think Humans of New York work. It's not about like goals or like mission or, I had a goal and I had a mission, but people just feel alone, period. You know what I mean? It's like that's why Humans of New York has succeeded. And I'm not even talking about the people reading it. I mean, the number one question that people ask me is, how do you get people to share with you? And, I think, for most people, and they're not just if you follow Humans of New York, like yesterday I was talking with a woman who, she had not heard of Humans of New York. This is a perfect example. She was catching a train. She had 30 minutes. She had never heard of Humans of New York. We start out with me kind of showing her the blog. And 30 minutes later, the place that we ended up at she was in this purgatory where her husband was depressed and an alcoholic, and he wasn't doing anything that was ultimately so bad. He didn't beat her, he didn't cheat on her, but she wasn't getting fulfilled. And she was wondering if she was living her best life by staying with him for the kids. And she came to this place where she admitted that she was kind of secretly hoping that he would do something bad to make the decision easier on her. And like that sort of like honesty and that sort of truth and that sort of rawness, I don't know if she even admitted that to herself before. And, people ask me, and that happens all the time, Tim. Like, that's good Humans of New York. Some of it's just, pictures of kids saying cute stuff, and some of it's cute couples, talking about their relationship. But, good Humans of New York is when we get to that moment, when me and somebody are thinking through something or talking through something that they might not have thought through before. And, the way people say, how do you get there with a complete stranger? I think that whenever I'm talking to somebody on the street, there are two threads running through their head at any given time. And one of them is this kind of fear of being exposed, this feeling of being vulnerable and discomfort. Who is this guy? Like, why is he asking me through these questions? And on the other hand, there is this appreciation of being heard, that even though I don't know this guy, this is the first person who has taken such a focused and detailed interest in my problems. And the feeling of having somebody focus so intensely, not on the sports teams you like or the music you like or any of the other kind of trivial things that we get asked on a daily basis, but these real things that you're struggling with, and maybe not even on the top of your mind, but like in the back of your mind that you're not even really bringing to the surface. Being heard like that is such a validating thing that's why people always share. And I tell people at the beginning of every interview that these questions are going to be hard, and anything you don't want to answer, you don't have to answer. And we talk about when they got molested as a child. We talk about them cheating on their husbands. We talk about their alcoholism. We talk about how they don't love their child as much as they expected they would. We talk about all these things, and almost never do people say, I don't want to talk about that. I don't want to talk about that. And I think the reason Humans of New York works isn't because the people who are reading it feel alone. That's a big part of it. Is that people, when they see somebody being vulnerable in a way that they're afraid to be vulnerable themselves, they connect with that person. But it really works because the people on the street that I meet are so thankful to have somebody really listen to them. That in that bubble in an hour and a half where I'm sitting with a stranger on the street, this magic happens where they're willing to kind of let me into a space in their mind or their soul or whatever it is that they don't really let other people into. And it's that place that I think connects with so many people.
That's an incredible gift / talent that you've developed that allows you to make people comfortable enough to open up to that extent in 30 minutes. I mean, that is incredibly impressive to me, even given the fact that perhaps one of the elements underpinning it is how heard they feel, which is absolutely, I'm sure, the case. I think about questions a lot, and you have much more experience than I do, and that just blows me away that you're able to get there in such a short period of time. What are some of the other ingredients or aspects of it that help you to questions, perhaps, that help you to get there?
It's not the questions. I have about 3 or 4 entry questions that I use. What's your biggest struggle? How has your life turned out differently than you expected it to? What do you feel most guilty about? But really, the planned questions are just kind of springboards into a conversation. And, how you get to that deep place with a person is absolute presence. It's being 100% there. You're not thinking in the framework of an interview. You're not looking at a list of questions. You're not thinking about your next question. You're not thinking about how this person fits into your idea of them and what you know about them. You're 100% there, and you're 100% listening to them. And your questions are 100% coming based on curiosity about what they are telling you and nothing else. And, why it is that I think Humans of New York is special, and I think Humans of New York is something that, is precious and maybe difficult to replicate, is that, I've spent 7 years in these conversations with 10,000 people. And it's not necessarily that I have gotten so good at asking questions. It's just that I've gotten so comfortable in the presence of a stranger and so comfortable in the presence of somebody that I've just met that I can sit there with them without an ounce of self-consciousness and just be there with them and listen to them and be curious about them. And there's this energy that happens there that this doesn't feel like somebody that's interviewing you. It feels like somebody who knows you and cares about you is really interested in what's going on in your life. And it's very subtle and hard to describe, but I think it's that energy and that presence and that being there. And it's something I had to earn. It's the same thing like public speaking, when do you really get good at public speaking? It's when you've done it so much that you can be yourself on the stage. And there's only one way to get there, and that's to be on stage scared as shit over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. And I think the only way to get to that place where you can have that rapport with a stranger is not by studying interview techniques. It's by sitting with thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of strangers until nothing feels strange about it anymore. And you're able to be in that calm, present place. And what happens is your energy transfers to the other person. And they get to that place too.
If we were to pick up the example that you gave just a few minutes ago about this woman talking about her relationship with her husband and his depression and alcoholism and so on, how did you, if you remember, how did you end up there? In other words, do you recall how the conversation headed to that point?
Oh yeah. I mean, it can. Well, let me give you another example. Since I already, let me give you an example of somebody I talked to in the Philippines a few weeks ago. Same thing. I've traveled to 30 different countries now. I've done the exact same work. I've been to Pakistan. I've been to Iran. I've been to Iraq. And I work with interpreters, and the process is exactly the same. I just walk up to people, random people, and get into these conversations with them. There was a woman in a park in the Philippines, and I started asking her, I think one of the first questions I asked her was, what is your biggest goal in life? And she said she wanted to have a good family life. And so I thought that was the story, and I started asking about that. And I learned that she wanted to have a good family life because when she was young, her family split. And she was forced to go to the courthouse with her mom and her dad at the age of 9. And the judge made her choose which parent she wanted to go with. And so I thought that was the story. And so I started asking questions about that. And then I learned that she ended up going with her mom. And afterwards, her mom remarried. And she didn't like her new stepfather, so she ran away. And I thought that was the story. So I started asking questions about that. And then I found out that the reason she ran away was because her stepfather was abusing her. And that she had never told a person in her life, including her mom, until that moment, that had happened. And that's how we end up in those places, is I am just curious about what's going on in there. I'm just curious about what happened. I want to know the story, and I just ask and I ask and I ask. And if something's not quite making sense, I want to know why. And so I ask more and I ask more. And it's like you can't, somebody can choose to eventually to not tell the truth by saying I'm uncomfortable with it. But it can't really be concealed if somebody is really, 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 really curious. You know what I mean? You can never, get to the point. Like, Humans of New York interviews don't work. I always say it's not because somebody doesn't have an interesting story. Humans of New York interviews don't work when I reach a place when somebody's uncomfortable with the process, which is absolutely fine. That's completely understandable. I'm a random person. I'm sharing these stories with 20 million people. It's 100% fine if you don't want to share. Like, that is nothing against you at all. But those are the interviews that don't make it on the blog. It's not that people aren't interesting. It's that Humans of New York really kind of thrives on this kind of honesty. And if somebody's willing to be honest, everybody's got an interesting story. And so it's like I hit dead ends not because somebody's boring. It's because somebody isn't comfortable with disclosing. And so that's kind of what defines, the Humans of New York interview, or what is usable of the Humans of New York interview.
How often when people disclose, when they do go there and disclose these very vulnerable stories or things they've never told anyone else, how often do they ask that you not use it, or that or express concern that it's going to cause some type of problem for them?
Well, that's one thing that I am very principled about. I give the person agency every step of the way. I tell them anything you don't want to answer. First of all, they don't have to talk to me. Okay? They have that decision. Once we start talking, I say any question you don't want to answer, you don't have to answer. If you tell me something during the course of this interview and you change your mind afterwards and don't want me to share it, that's fine. At the end of the interview, if you would like me to photograph your hands or your feet instead of your face, we can do that. In fact, if it's a very vulnerable story, I will normally insist on that to protect the person or protect somebody that they're talking about. If after I've done the interview and before it's posted, at any time you change your mind and you don't want me to share it, I give them my email address. And after the photo is up, for any reason, at any time, if you become uncomfortable from all the attention and would like me to take the story down, I immediately will. And so people have control of it every step of the way. It's very important to me that nobody ever sees Humans of New York as something that was done to them. I always want it to be seen as something that was done with them. And, have I failed at that sometimes? Out of the 10,000 people have I interviewed, have there been people who didn't expect me to share a certain part of their story or was surprised by it or it was a negative experience for? There have been a handful, but I can only say that those are the worst moments for me. When Humans of New York was a negative experience for somebody, because that's who I really care about is the people that are on the blog, because they're the people who kind of I had that moment with. I spent an hour and a half with them, and we got to that place, and I just, if they are hurt by it, you know what I mean, or if it's like, especially if they were really kind of vulnerable, then that's when I feel the worst about myself, because I know how much pressure that spotlight can be, and I know, how difficult it can be, under having 20 million people look at you, and so, if I ever feel that like I maybe accidentally misrepresented it, or that's when I feel the worst.
How do you think about money as it relates to Humans of New York? Ostensibly, you want to probably eat more than peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and eggs now.
Right.
At the
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, in terms of what you do with advertising or partnerships or projects, because you have such sensitive, not always, but you have such potentially sensitive subject matter, and it's so personalized for these folks in many cases. How do you think about that?
Right. Well, right now, obviously, so Humans of New York, I think we sold 1.5 million books. The television show, Facebook, and Facebook, there was more than one person interested in it, and Facebook, they compensated me well for the 4 years of work that I worked on the television series. So, I'm very comfortable right now. Humans of New York has made me let's just say I'm not worrying about peanut butter and sandwiches anymore. I'm very comfortable. With that being said, I will say that Humans of New York has raised. I've made a fraction of the money with Humans of New York that we have raised for charity. A small fraction of the money that we've raised for charity. I have turned down maybe more money than I've made from people who want to use my brand to partner with their brand. Big brands have offered me a lot of money to do Humans of, and I'm just going to make up some names, you know what I mean? Like Humans of Mercedes-Benz, Humans of China, sponsored by Virgin Airlines. These are all fake things that I'm making up right now, but have resembled offers that have been made to me. Where I make the dividing line is that I'm willing to make money as Brandon Stanton. A big part of my income comes from speeches. I give about 10 of these a year. And that is a big part of my income. I have sell books as Brandon Stanton. I don't sell the name Humans of New York to anyone. I don't rent my brand to anyone. And because I never want any piece of content that I share to have a single motive. I've never broken that seal. And, it's been so tempting, but I just know if I break it once, I'm never going to get it back. So for 7 years, I've never been compensated for a piece of content that I've posted on my blog. And that is the main delineation, that I make between, what can be monetized and what can't. And because of that, like I said, I'm not worrying about peanut butter and sandwiches anymore. But there is a little bit of an insecurity. Am I going to look back in 40 years if everything suddenly goes away and Facebook and Instagram nobody are using anymore? Am I going to be like, oh man, I'm working the night shift now, and I had 20 million. I had 20 million followers 20 years ago. Maybe I should have tried a little harder to make some money, but that's how I view it now.
Should have done those Humans in New York lunchboxes while I had the chance.
There you go.
So you mentioned the book. I'd like to chat about that for a second, because it's been books at this point certainly, but at least as I understand it, the first book, so millions of copies, certainly more than 1 million. Was it easy to find a publisher for that first book?
No. I barely did. The Macmillan, God bless them. So at the time, I think when I sold the book, I had a few 100,000 Facebook fans, and it was growing so fast. There was so much energy, things were really taking off. And I just thought, oh my gosh, everybody's going to want to publish this book. And there's 6 big publishers. I'm sure you know all this, or 7 or something like that. And the goal is to get all of them interested. And then, in the perfect world, all of them are interested, and then they bid against each other. Right. And so only 3 of them would meet with me, or 4 of them maybe. And during those meetings, I thought that I killed it. I thought, oh man, then I described it so well. I presented so well. They're all going to be very interested. And so we had an auction, and the bids were due by 12 o'clock noon on one day. And it's like, at 11 o'clock, I hadn't heard anything from my agent. And I was just like, well, what's going on? So I texted him, and he goes, the first 3 dropped out. They didn't make an offer. There's still one that we haven't heard from yet. And I'm just like, oh my God, because that book was my life raft, because I didn't have any money at that time. I was hoping to get a little bit of a book deal so I could, pay my bills. And I just remember I went to the YMCA and I just ran 5 miles because I thought it was going to be the worst day of my life. And then when I got on the treadmill, I found out that Macmillan had made a small but respectable offer. And that's how I got a book deal by the skin of my teeth, which I think was lucrative for all parties involved.
And what were some of the reasons for not meeting with you or not putting in an offer that they gave?
Because there's 2 types of books that have a history of not selling well. Well, there's a lot of types, but mine fit 2 categories. It was a photography book. Photography books don't sell based on conventional wisdom. And it was what they viewed as a regional book, where it is a photography book centered on a single city, therefore nobody's going to want it. That was the argument against publishing Humans of New York.
Oops. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love these stories because they are the rule and not the exception for so many things that turn into something.
Well, things that are not derivative. You know what I mean?
Right.
In my mind, in my mind, like the most valuable idea is the one that nobody's ever seen before. Like that's when you've got the gold. But you've got a better chance of just choosing something else that's good and making something derivative on it. Because then when you go into these places and you pitch, you can say, oh, this is 50 Shades of Grey, but with furries. I don't know. It's just like it's funny that like for me as an artist and as a creator, the last thing I ever want to do is be describing my work as it's this but with a twist. You know what I mean? Like I want to be creating something new. However, in the marketplace, the things that have most likely chance of getting bought are things that people can peg to other past successes. And so when you walk in with something like what I thought was Humans of New York's greatest value, which was there really wasn't anything else like it at the time, they viewed as its biggest detriment. Yeah.
Yeah. But what are the comparables? You're like, that's the whole point. There aren't comparables.
Yeah, right. Comparables. That fucking word. I mean, are you kidding me? Like, I just like in the same thing, when I was making the television series, like the same thing. It's like, as an artist, I want this to be like nothing else that's been. That's like the only thing I care about is making something that's really unlike anything else. Like that is if it's like something else, it's I don't really want to obsess over it for 3 years trying to make it. My goal is to make something new and something fresh. And when you're trying to get compensated for your work, the thing that you care about the most as an artist is often the thing that's held against you the most, because people are risk averse and they want to see something comparable that has also done well.
What's next for you? I mean, do you have 5-year plans, 3-year plans, and so on at this point, or is it still 24 hours by 24 hours? What's next for you?
I do. Well, I'm having a baby, so that's going to be new.
Congratulations. That's a big deal.
Thank you. Having a baby in July. So beyond that, which is going to be new, for me right now, the biggest kind of artistic tension is knowing, because of my experience on social media, the past 7 years, knowing how social media works, knowing the importance of output and content and daily content and engagement and things like that, knowing how to build an audience on one hand and wanting to push myself as an artist on the other hand. What I really want to do as an artist is I kind of want to withdraw from the daily, output model. I want to work on things that have longer time frames, that are more polished, that are maybe longer but take longer to produce and more resources. But that, in order to do that, that requires me to kind of pull back from the blog, which the golden rule of social media is keep engaging with your audience, keep connecting with your audience. Don't lose touch. But the artist in me wants to go disappear for a while and go into a dark cave and come out with something. So I think that is the main push and pull in my mind right now. So I'm going to be going to the Philippines next month to work on. I'm going to spend a month filming a documentary on somebody, because I love documentaries and I want to make a documentary that is very interesting. So that might not be what's best for business or best for growing audience or best by social media metrics, but that is what is exciting to me. And it all comes back to that moment. It's like it's so funny, and I think you're probably the same way, is that we have these mantras and these things that we've learned that we stand on stage and we say and we think about, don't wait for the perfect idea. It's never going to seem perfect. You just got to go after it. Choose, what is nourishing in the moment, things like that. And if you're like me, like I have to preach to myself, a lot, and tell myself the same thing that I'm telling other people, because it's so easy to kind of, fall back into what everybody else is struggling with as well, because you never truly escape it. And so, one of the things that I do is, I go back to that moment when I lost my job and I was walking in Chicago, and I asked myself, if nothing mattered but how I was spending my time, what would I be doing? What would be most nourishing for me in any given moment, if nothing else mattered except for how I spent my time? And I'm trying to remind myself of that. The same thing I tell other people. And right now, I want to go to the Philippines and I want to make a documentary, and it might not be best for business and it might not be best for humans of New York, but it's what Brandon wants to do. And so that is the North Star that I'm trying to follow.
Good for you, man. I'm excited for you to disappear for a little while.
Well, thank you.
That may come off the wrong way, but I think you get the sentiment behind it.
Yeah, exactly.
And I have a random suggestion.
Okay.
Which is, if you have not read Cryptonomicon, which is a book by Neil Stephenson, who also wrote Snow Crash.
Oh, I love Snow Crash.
So Cryptonomicon, part of the through line, one of the narratives takes place in the Philippines. So that could be
cool.
That could be fun to pick up. But
yeah.
Brandon, thank you so much for taking the time today. This was really a wonderful experience for me, and thank you for being vulnerable also, and maybe filling in some of the color in the story of your life thus far. It's been really nice to get to know you a little better in this conversation.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. Hope some of that's usable.
Yeah, no, I think it is. Is there anything else you would like to ask of people, suggest to people? Any closing comments before we wrap up?
No, I think that's okay. No, I think that's it.
All right. Awesome. Well, once again, really appreciate you making the time, particularly how much you think about how you spend your time to chat with me and with everybody today. And for everyone listening, you can, as always, find links to everything that we have spoken about, to all of Brandon's projects as well in the show notes at tim.blog/podcast. And until next time, do what is nourishing for you in the moment, or at least ponder the question. And thanks for listening. Hey guys, this is Tim again. Just a few more things before you take off. Number one, this is 5 Bullet Friday. Do you want to get a short email from me? Would you enjoy getting a short email from me every Friday that provides a little morsel of fun before the weekend? And 5 Bullet Friday is a very short email where I share the coolest things I've found or that I've been pondering over the week. That could include favorite new albums that I've discovered. It could include gizmos and gadgets and all sorts of weird shit that I've somehow dug up in the world of the esoteric as I do. It could include favorite articles that I've read and that I've shared with my close friends, for instance. And it's very short. It's just a little tiny bite of goodness before you head off for the weekend. So if you want to receive that, check it out. Just go to 4hourworkweek.com. That's 4hourworkweek.com, all spelled out, and just drop in your email, and you will get the very next one. And if you sign up, I hope you enjoy it. This episode is brought to you by Four Sigmatic. If you're a longtime listener of the show or brand new to the podcast, my favorite Finnish entrepreneurs who founded this company, of course I don't know that many Finnish entrepreneurs, but they may be my favorites, have something new that I've been loving. And some of you are familiar with Four Sigmatic. I've used their products for years now. They were introduced to me by an acrobat, of all folks, and they tend to mix different types of medicinal mushrooms into their products. I have recently started using their matcha, which is a green tea, which is designed as a coffee alternative. And if you're trying to cut back on caffeine, as I am these days, the matcha is a great option. and one that I originally learned to love in Japan. It has a very smooth texture to it. Their matcha blend, in particular, includes the amino acid L-theanine, which helps to provide a, let's call it, balanced boost of energy without the jitters. It also includes the adaptogen astragalus, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, which may help with overall stress tolerance. And for those of you who are wondering, no, the products don't taste like mushrooms. If they say mushroom coffee, for instance, another product that I use doesn't taste like mushrooms, it tastes like coffee. But you get the nutritional benefits of some of these special ingredients. So the products don't taste like mushrooms and are enjoyable. I offer them to my house guests and use them myself, and I don't particularly want to drink anything that tastes like mushrooms. So, moving on. The folks at Four Sigmatic have designed a few special deals for you guys, my listeners, which include many of my favorite products of theirs. So check it out. Visit Four Sigmatic, FOURSIGMATIC.com/TimTim. That's TIM, no space, to see these special deals, which are not offered anywhere else. Remember to use the code TimTim. I don't know why they chose TimTim, but there we go. Remember to use the code TimTim at checkout to receive your special discount. Again, that's foursigmatic.com/TimTim and enter the promo code TimTim. Check it out. This episode is brought to you by WordPress.com. I love WordPress. I have used it for so many years. It's my go-to platform for blogging and creating websites. I use WordPress.com for everything every day. My site, tim.blog, is built on it. The websites for my books, including Tools of Titans, Tribe of Mentors, it's all on WordPress.com. And the founder, Matt Mullenweg, one of my close friends, has appeared on this show many times. Just search Matt Mullenweg Tequila Ferris for quite an exciting time. Whether you're looking to create a personal blog, a business site, or both, you can make a really big impact right out of the box when you build on WordPress.com. And you'll be in good company. It's used by The New Yorker, Jay-Z, Beyonce, 538, TechCrunch, TED, CNN, and Time, just to name a handful. And one of my friends at Google, she'll remain nameless, has told me that WordPress.com offers the, quote, best out-of-the-box SEO imaginable, end quote. And it's one of the many reasons that nearly 30% of the internet is run on WordPress. You do not need experience or to hire someone. That's perhaps the best part. WordPress.com guides you through the entire experience. They have hundreds of designs and templates that you can use. And it's easy to get started. There's no need to worry about security, upgrades, hosting, any of that. They offer 24/7 support, and they're very, very responsive. If you have questions, they get right back to you. And this allows you to create the highest quality with the least amount of headache and friction. So if you're building a website, period, and my friends come to me and ask what I use, what I recommend they use, the answer is WordPress.com. So check it out. If you want to get started today, learn more with a 15% discount off any new plan, go to WordPress.com/Tim to create your website and find the plan that's right for you. So learn more. Take a look. WordPress.com/Tim for 15% off a brand new website. Check it out.